Greetings, traveler. From now on, we can only use yellow items. Our goals are to find 50 different yellow items, collect 3,000 septums, and kill the dragon priest Krosis. We have 7 in-game days to do all of that, and we're doing it in survival mode on expert difficulty. Enjoy watching. At first, I was thinking about starting the timer only after we got out of the cave beneath Helgen, but then I realized I could make things a little stricter and start it all the way back on the cart ride. So yeah, that's why you're seeing all of this. As for the race, I went with a high elf because they're objectively the yellowest race in Skyrim. I didn't spend hours working on his appearance, I just left him pretty much as he was by default because to me, this is simply the classic high elf look. I'm not racist, by the way. Right away, I noticed the healing spell. It has this golden glow to it, so I decided it was allowed. I'm applying the exact same color rule to magic as I am to items. So obviously any spell that isn't yellow is off limits. But healing actually fits this challenge really well. Because, well, there just aren't any yellow health potions in Skyrim, so this is basically the only decent way for us to heal. Food barely restores any health, and if we've got an option that actually fits the rules, then why wouldn't we use it? After that, I quickly ran off to clear out the Imperial barracks, because if we're gonna hit our money goal, we'll have to pick up literally every single coin. Every single one. And this is where I found the first item I could genuinely call yellow. A broom. Well, if we don't count the gold coins. I decided to take it for now and, well, I'll make the final call later. But honestly, I think it's yellow enough. As for the bread, I decided not to take it because it's still orange. It does have these lighter golden stripes, but the main color just doesn't fit our rule. There is one exception though, and that's keys. We won't be using lockpicks because they're gray, and we won't be using gray keys either. But keys like this, the orange gold kind, are allowed because they're basically the only way we'll be able to open any locked doors at all. And even then, only some of them. Still, they won't count toward the list of yellow items we need to find. And one more thing about coin purses. Yeah, the pouches themselves are definitely more orange-brown than yellow, but what actually goes into our inventory isn't the pouch, it's the gold coins inside. So we'll just say I throw the pouch away and keep the gold, because honestly adding such a tiny restriction just feels a bit unnecessary. I think you guys would agree. On the way, I also tried deliberately aggroing a few Imperials so they could beat me up and I could level restoration from the damage. But I forgot that I barely had any magicka at this point, so I decided not to waste any more time on it and just kept moving. And along the way, of course, I picked up every gold coin I could from all the places most of you probably already know by heart. Once we got out of the cave, there was a small bandit camp nearby where we could find a treasure map that might actually help us out a little. At first I decided to wait for Ralof so he could help, but with how slowly he was making his way over to me, I eventually just went in by myself. I took out 2 of the bandits on my own, and at some point I completely lost track of the third one, the archer. But when I noticed a bunch of arrows sticking out of the trees, I quickly realized that Ralof had finally shown up to help. And of course the map was on the bandit he took out. I spent quite a while looking at it and trying to decide whether I should be allowed to use it because, well, it's not exactly yellow, but then I picked it up and opened it, and as it turns out the route itself is clearly drawn in yellow. Still, that wasn't really enough to convince me. It's not even close to 50-50. There's just way too little yellow on it. So in the end, I decided not to take the map. But whether we're going to use the treasure chest that has already spawned in the world, we'll find out a little later. After that, instead of waiting around, I ran straight toward the 3 guardian stones. The mage, the warrior, and the thief. And out of those 3, we're going with the mage stone. Because right now, basically the only thing we have is restoration magic. So that's what we need to focus on leveling. And with this stone, it'll level much faster. Then I immediately headed to the nearest mine. The plan was to level restoration a little more during combat and look for any money, food, or potentially yellow items we might need. And since this is an early game location, the bandits inside shouldn't give us any real trouble. The bandit at the entrance was doing her job a little too well. I had to run around with her for a bit, but eventually she went down. Then a wolf came running over and I managed to take it out too. But when I saw two more, I decided to pay them a visit myself and let's say show a little initiative. And because of that, one of them managed, at the very last possible second, to infect our high elf with a disease that made our melee attacks 25% less effective. And that's actually a pretty serious problem for us right now, because every fight is going to take even longer. As for what happened inside the mine, there honestly isn't that much to talk about. Basically, I just beat up a few bandits, looted the place a little, and actually found a pretty convenient way to deal with them. But as I moved farther in, I found something pretty interesting in one of the chests. A Varla stone. And yeah, I agree, the stone itself is obviously blue, no question about that. But the frame around it is gold, and it takes up a noticeable part of the item. It's not just some tiny little detail, so for now I decided to take it. And honestly, I got really lucky with this one, because it could actually help us reach our money goal. After that, I ran around a little more, fought a few more bandits, and noticed something kind of strange. For some reason, for the first time in all the times I've been here, every single bandit in this cave was a woman. I've got nothing against women, obviously. They're lovely, wonderful people. I was just surprised that this dungeon had somehow spawned so many of them at once. It was kind of interesting. As for food, I found a baked potato here and happily grabbed it. But all the raw potatoes I kept finding didn't really qualify, at least in my opinion. There's barely any yellow on them, just a few tiny spots, and counting that would be a massive stretch, so I decided not to take them. A baked potato, on the other hand, has a big, clearly visible yellow section, so that one absolutely counts. And right now, I'm starting to run into another problem. I honestly don't see many things we'll actually be able to eat, so food is clearly going to be a whole challenge of its own. Now we're heading to Riverwood. And honestly, I was kind of surprised that we got there at almost the exact same time as Rayloff, because I was sure he'd make it there way before us. The first thing I did was clean out the entire village. I took every gold coin and every piece of cheese I could find, well, yellow cheese specifically, because that fits our rules perfectly. I also found a doll in the inn. Most of it is sort of a dirty yellow, while the hair is a much brighter, more obvious yellow, so I decided to take that too. While I was there, I also talked to Orgnar, who had an apple pie. And, you know, there definitely is some yellow on it, but once you spin it around and take a closer look, it becomes pretty clear that the other colors still make up most of it, so I decided to leave the pie behind. By the way, I didn't choose Rayloff back in Helgen for no reason. His sister's house has quite a bit of cheese and some gold in it, which is more than you'll find at Hadvar's family's place. Now, it might seem like that choice doesn't matter at all since we're stealing everything anyway. But there are usually several people hanging around inside Gerder's house, which creates a few extra obstacles. So, yeah, there was at least some logic behind the choice. After that, I quickly headed over to the Riverwood trader and picked up the quest to find the Golden Claw. We actually really need this quest. First of all, the claw itself goes straight onto our list of yellow items. And second, if we return it to Lucan, he'll give us another few hundred septims. Then, of course, we'll just steal the claw back. So this one quest can potentially take care of two things we need at once. I cleaned out the shop a little more, then bought a small yellow book from Lucan, which also goes straight onto our list. The next really important part of the plan involved an elf you all know very well, Fandel. He can train us in archery and we're going to need that skill pretty badly. My main plan for the fight with Krosis is to keep him at a distance and, well, a bow is obviously the best way to do that. But right now we can't really level archery through combat because we don't have a yellow bow or any yellow arrows. So training with Faendal is basically our only quick option. I did his little favor, recruited recruited him as a follower and immediately spent some gold on training, though of course I just took all that gold back out of his inventory afterward. But for now, it's very important not to dismiss Faendal. Instead, I need to leave him waiting for us right here on the street in Riverwood, and there are two reasons for that. The first is that if I dismiss him now, he'll head home and go to sleep. His key is grey, so we're not allowed to take it, and if I make it back from Bleak Falls Barrow during the night, I'd have to wait not just until 9 in the morning, but until around noon before he finally leaves his house. The second reason is that Faendal isn't allowed to do any of the usual follower stuff for us. He can't help us in combat, carry our things, or do anything else on our behalf. The whole point is to complete this challenge on our own, so Faendal stays here and I keep moving, and if you're wondering why we even need this elf at all, well, a little later on, he's going to help us with one very specific and strategically important part of the plan that I simply wouldn't be able to pull off without him. Now we're heading to Bleak Falls Barrow. On the way, I decided to take on a few bandits, and honestly, that turned out not to be the smartest decision. While I was busy dealing with them, my character started freezing really fast, and my health began dropping just as quickly. There were even more bandits waiting near the entrance to Bleak Falls Barrow, so I didn't fight those guys at all and just ran for the door as fast as I possibly could. The cold kept draining my health and the archer behind me came very close to finishing off our elf, but honestly, things didn't get much easier once I made it inside. I had barely any health left and my character wasn't warming up nearly as quickly as I would have liked, so I had to deal with the next two bandits extremely carefully. Now why was I even still getting into these fights? Because we need to keep leveling restoration even if it's only little by little. That also raises our overall character level, and we really need to keep investing in health. Just keep pumping it higher and higher. That's exactly why I deliberately got into some of these fights, even when I probably could have avoided them. A little farther in, the skeevers bit us again and gave us yet another disease. And honestly, this was really starting to stress me out, because I still had no idea how I was supposed to cure any of this without breaking our rules. By the way, right before the spider fight, I happened to notice a skeleton that stays completely intact instead of collapsing into a pile of bones. As far as I understand, if you're playing as a necromancer, you can potentially reanimate it and use it as a minion. I'd never noticed that before. I didn't bother fighting the spider itself. I quickly freed Arvel the Swift and immediately started punching him in the back. At first, he didn't even want to fight back, but eventually he changed his mind, which turned out to be a very bad decision for him. Once I reached the Draugr, it became pretty clear that we definitely couldn't afford to waste time on full-on fights anymore. So I just lured them into traps and looted the gold from them afterward. Like I said, we need to pick up literally every single coin, because we'll be spending plenty of it later. That's how I eventually made my way to the main crypt. And honestly, I had to redo this part a few times. At first, I tried to get through it without learning the Word of Power at all, because it's blue. We apply the same color rule to magic as we do to items. And even though I had no intention of actually using the word, for some reason I decided that even learning it would be against the rules. The problem was that the Golden Claw quest simply wouldn't update unless I learned it. And without completing the quest, we wouldn't get those few hundred septums from Lucan. So in the end, I had no choice but to learn it, but I mean, come on, technically the game just added it to our character and we're not actually using it. So after thinking about it for a bit, I decided it wasn't really breaking the challenge in any meaningful way. As soon as the boss Draugr woke up, the quest finally updated. I didn't fight him because there was absolutely no point. He had a ton of health and he could almost one-shot our elf. The important thing was that we'd already completed the part of the quest we needed. By the way, near the cave exit, I found a gold necklace. That also goes straight onto our list of gold, or more accurately, yellow items. After that, I had to make my way back to Riverwood from the far side of Bleak Falls Barrow. At first I thought that might be a problem, but honestly the trip back wasn't nearly as bad as I expected. On the way I passed the spot where a treasure chest had already spawned because of the treasure map, but I still decided not to open it because the map itself was just too questionable. I didn't want to claim the reward just because the chest had already appeared in the world. If the map doesn't fit our rules, then taking advantage of what it spawned wouldn't be right satisfied either. Back in Riverwood, I immediately returned the golden claw to Lucan and got 400 septims. Then I immediately stole it right back. After that, I went to get Faendal and we continued on our way. At one point, we even stopped for a bit and just enjoyed the view of Skyrim at night. But a little farther down the road, I heard some wolves. Under our rules, Faendal isn't allowed to help me in combat, so I left him waiting a little way back while I went to deal with them myself. Of course, Faendal wandered away from where I'd left him, so I couldn't find him right away afterward. But he never joined the fight or dealt any damage, so everything's fine here and there's nothing to worry about. Then though, we ran into a much more serious problem. I noticed that the quest to warn the Jarl of Whiterun about the dragon hadn't updated for some reason, and without the right quest stage, we might not be able to enter the city at all, even though we really needed to get into Whiterun. So I started reloading saves and heading back to Gerdur, trying to talk to her after all. But it was already nighttime, she was asleep, and no matter how hard I hammered on her door, nothing happened. I didn't have a key to her house either because after Helgen, as you may remember, I didn't follow Ralof to his sister's place, so I decided to just wait around and get some sleep. While I was waiting, I also messed around with the carts a little more. At some point though, they started acting like they were possessed by some kind of evil spirits. After that, I decided I wasn't going anywhere near them again. When Gerdur finally woke up, she still didn't have the dialogue option I needed. At that point, I honestly thought I was going to have to replay a huge chunk of the run, so I loaded a save from when Faendal and I were already on our way to Whiterun and decided to just keep going, reach the city and see if things were actually broken. Thankfully, once I got to the gates, the dialogue I needed with the guards showed up after all. That was a huge relief because I really didn't want to replay that entire section. Before entering Whiterun, we had 1,489 septims, which is pretty much exactly half of our financial goal. But like I said, we'll still be spending plenty of that money. So while everyone was asleep, I started slipping into every house I could get inside and cleaning them out until morning. There was a little more cheese to be found in Whiterun, and I'd officially like to name Jorvaskr the most profitable location in the city. I could be wrong, but there was seriously a lot of gold lying around in the basement. I also stopped by Arcadia's cauldron and spotted a yellow potion, which of course I immediately took. By the way, I also stopped by Belethor's, and while I was digging through his pockets, I found two really useful items, and both of them were yellow. The first was this ring, and the second was this necklace. Unfortunately, I had a 0% chance of stealing either one. And okay, missing out on the ring isn't the end of the world, but not getting the necklace is actually a serious problem. During the fight, Krosis will be using a staff of fireballs, and those fireballs deal area of effect damage. So we desperately need some fire resistance, but unfortunately for now, we're going without it. And what makes it even worse is how lucky we were to have this necklace spawn on Belethor in the first place. After that, I went back to the inn and got some sleep. Our character was already exhausted and we were starting to get some pretty nasty penalties because of it, so I had to at least fix that problem temporarily. Alright, let's see where we're at so far. It's 7:30 PM on the 18th. Just to give you a better idea, at 10 AM on the 17th, we were still with Ralof inside Helgen Keep. Right now, we have 18 items, but 2 of them are keys, and we're not counting those. So technically, we have 16 separate yellow items, but we could have had 20. In Jorvaskr, behind an expert level lock, we left an elven bow belonging to Ayla the Huntress. And in the Jarl's quarters, we could have taken a Whiterun guard shield and armor, which were behind an apprentice level lock, as well as an elven sword inside a display case behind a master level lock. As for gold, we currently have almost 2,400 septims, but if any of you are thinking that our financial goal is almost complete, I have to disappoint you, because we still have quite a few expenses ahead of us, so this amount doesn't guarantee anything just yet. And now it's time to send our hungry and sick high elf to the next mega important stop on our route. Travelers, please support the channel in any of the ways shown on screen and make sure you're subscribed. I'd also like to invite you to become a channel member. You'll have the chance to influence future content and even get a personalized video made just for you. Most importantly, you'll help me grow as a creator and keep this channel moving forward. The first thing I did when I arrived in Markarth was run straight to the inn to see what Klepper had for sale, and to my pleasant surprise, I found a cooked chicken breast. I immediately started comparing it to our baked potato and cheese just to figure out whether it was actually yellow enough, and yeah, it definitely was, so I took it. And when it comes to food, this thing was honestly a massive upgrade. A cooked chicken breast restores a full 220 points of hunger. That's an enormous amount compared to all the cheese and baked potatoes we'd been constantly shoveling down up to this point. After that, I immediately started searching all of Markarth. I went everywhere I could possibly get into, took every septum I found, all the gold, and basically anything yellow that fit our rules. And honestly, arriving in Markarth turned out to be far more important than visiting Whiterun, but I'll explain exactly why a little later. Because first, I finally had to answer one important question. What were we actually going to do about all the diseases our main character had picked up? I decided to visit the Temple of Debella in Markarth and seriously think it over. Okay, yes, technically the shrine itself isn't yellow. Not even close. But then I started thinking, isn't this basically the same as using a carriage? In both cases, we're using some kind of intermediary object that provides us with a service. With a carriage, that service is transportation. Here, it's healing. But the resource we use to pay for that service is the same in both cases: gold. And gold is yellow. Besides, these diseases were seriously starting to get in our way. Severe ataxia, for example, made lockpicking and pickpocketing 50% harder, and we need to rob not only houses but NPCs in every city we visit, so that penalty was a serious problem for us. I stood there and thought about it for a while inside Skyrim. Then I sat there and thought about it some more in front of my computer, and eventually I decided that yes, using the shrine would be both fair and completely logical. So I cured our high elf and continued with the plan. Our next destination was Understone Keep, and why were we going there? The main reason was yellow items, dwarven scrap metal, dwarven weapons, maybe even some bows. I knew there was a Dwemer museum in Markarth, and we absolutely needed to get inside it. First, I grabbed a few useful things lying around Calcelmo. Then I stole the key to the Dwemer museum, but even after getting the key, I still didn't go straight to the museum. First, I bought several different yellow spell tomes from Calcelmo, but one of them had to be learned right away because we genuinely needed it. Especially later during the fight against Krosis, when we'll need to restore a lot of health immediately instead of healing gradually, so we learn fast healing. But even after that, I still didn't go to the Dwemer museum. Instead, I accepted a quest from Calcelmo that led us into the Nichuan Zel excavation site. And no, I didn't do this to get the dwarven armor hidden down there. As far as I remember, you can find almost a full set inside, but it's behind locked doors or inside locked containers that we'd have to open with lockpicks, and as you may remember, lockpicks are something we've completely refused to use. Besides, we simply didn't have enough time to search for all that armor. I had a different plan. Since we were already in Markarth and the enemies were literally right there, I thought, why not use them to level restoration? Our character was already starting to get tired, so we would have to rest before our next major trip anyway. That meant we could spend a little more time here and try to get some proper leveling done. So I decided to head down and level my healing a little during the fights with the enemies inside. But on the way, I once again ran into one of those cursed, demonically possessed cards. I have no idea what keeps getting into these things, but this time I decided to just walk around it and not even try to find out what would happen. Then, once I entered the excavation site, I suddenly spotted a dwarven dagger, and you have no idea how happy that made me. I had absolutely no clue this thing was here. None at all. all. First of all, we had just added another yellow item to our list, and second, we finally had a proper melee weapon. So instead of constantly punching everything with our bare hands, we could finally use a dagger. That alone should make close range fights at least a little easier. So I took it and continued deeper inside. But after spending quite a lot of time down there, I gradually realized that my original idea wasn't exactly working. First, I messed around for a while with a frostbite spider before the next room. Then, farther inside, I ran into two regular spiders. One was smaller and wasn't much of a problem, but the other was significantly larger, and that one was much more difficult. I was barely dealing any damage to it, and I simply couldn't heal myself quickly enough. Our restoration wasn't strong enough yet to keep up with all the health it was taking away from me. I spent a really long time there. I kept reloading, thinking, trying again, then thinking some more. I moved the perk point around in the restoration tree. Tried apprentice restoration, tried perks that made healing stronger, and generally tested a bunch of different approaches. But I still kept coming out worse every time. None of those options gave me any kind of genuinely strong result. And then, at the end, I saw another spider that made even less sense to fight normally. Basically, after wasting enough time on all of this, I finally came up with a much better approach. First of all, I now had a dagger instead of my fists. That meant I could level one-handed, and it was increasing much faster now than anything I could do before. Second, I remembered that I had bought several other spell tomes from Calcelmo, and they were still sitting in my inventory, and that's when a proper plan finally came together. All I needed was to put the perk point into apprentice restoration. I didn't need to waste any more time on the frostbite spider I'd been messing around with earlier. Instead, I could go straight into the next room, quickly kill the smaller spider, save the game, and then gradually provoke the larger one with literally one hit at a time. That way I could keep hitting it with the dagger and leveling one-handed. And why do we even need to level one-handed right now? Because leveling our skills also raises our character's overall level, and every new level lets us invest more points into health. That's extremely important for us right now. We need to increase our health so Krosis doesn't take our elf out with a single attack later. But this created another problem. Whether we like it or not, the spider's health would gradually run out. And if we simply killed it, our training session would end right there. And that's where restoration came in, because just for a second, we already had several different types of restoration magic available. Of course, we couldn't use all of those spells. Steadfast Ward, for example, is clearly blue magic. It creates a blue magical shield, so we definitely can't use it. And because of that, I didn't even bother learning the spell. But we did have healing hands, and that spell allowed me to heal the spider itself. So basically, we were successfully training two skills at once, and these were pretty much the only skills we were even allowed to level right now. We didn't have any armor we were allowed to wear, and there wasn't any other magic that fit our rules, so our options were fairly limited. Little by little, while still trying to use our time reasonably, I managed to level both one-handed and restoration. Then I decided the spider had suffered enough and headed back. But even after that, we still weren't going to the Dwemer Museum, because I had one more little development planned for you. We were going to make a quick trip to Brother Verulus, and you've probably already figured out why. That's right, we're going after the Ring of Namira. Since we're playing with nothing but yellow, I guess anything we eat should probably be yellow too. Like, for example, our fellow high elves, but let's take this one step at a time. You'll see everything soon enough. After speaking to Brother Verulus, we immediately ran into the Hall of the Dead without wasting another minute. And while I was in there, I found another yellow book. I had no idea this one was here either. Unfortunately, I don't get to play Skyrim as often as I'd like, so some of these things are genuinely new to me, but at least that means the reactions are real. When I found that book, I was genuinely incredibly happy. First of all, it increased our restoration by another point, and second, it gave us one more item for our list of yellow things. After that, we spoke to Iola. Then we went back to Brother Verulus one more time, and only then did we finally head to the Dwemer Museum. Basically, I had arranged the entire route so that every location came naturally after the previous one. That way, we wouldn't have to run back and forth across Markarth and waste time for no reason. That was the route I came up with while I was actually doing the run. Once I sneaked into the Dwemer Museum, the Markarth guards immediately became hostile. Fighting them directly made absolutely no sense. First, there were several of them. Second, it would have been difficult. And third, the fight would have taken far too long. Basically, it would have been a complete waste of time that gave us nothing particularly useful. But while exploring the museum, I suddenly found this trap. And the moment I saw it, all the pieces immediately fell into place. I decided to lure every guard into this room, step on the pressure plate, and let this spinning thing deal with them for me. Of course, I didn't manage it on the first attempt, or the second, or the third, or the fourth, not even the fifth, because sometimes the intelligence of these guards genuinely surprised me. I expected them to behave one way, and then they would suddenly do something completely different. But despite all of that, I eventually managed to lure them into the trap. And once that was done, I could calmly loot the Dwemer museum and collect every yellow item that was available to us. There were also several pieces of dwarven armor inside, and honestly, looking at them was a little painful, because this armor completely fit our rules, and we could have simply worn it. But there was nothing I could do about it, so I had to leave it where it was. Once I'd almost completely cleaned out the museum and was getting ready to leave, I started to worry a little. After all, we had just had a small incident involving several guards. And I thought the rest of the guards might have a few questions for me once I stepped outside. But to my enormous and very pleasant surprise, there were no questions at all. Nobody bothered me. Nobody stopped me. Nobody cared in the slightest, so I simply continued with the plan. Now we needed to bring Faendal along again. But remember, he still wasn't allowed to participate in any fights. And now we were finally approaching the one specific goal I had been dragging him around for all the way from Riverwood. According to my plan, we first needed to reach the Lover Stone. Its blessing makes every single skill level 15% faster, which would be a huge advantage for us right now. So I quickly made my way there, activated it, and immediately continued toward Kolskeggr Mine, which was located nearby. Some of you have already figured out why we're going there. Some of you probably haven't, but you're about to see. Before we even reached the mine though, we ran into a problem. There were Forsworn outside. And under our rules, Faendal wasn't allowed to fight them. So I needed to leave him somewhere farther away and deal with all the enemies myself. But here's the thing. I simply lost Faendal. I had absolutely no idea where he'd gone or what I was supposed to do about it. So at some point I just stopped worrying about him and fought the Forsworn myself. The fight was a little difficult because there were several of them. But eventually I accidentally found a spot where they couldn't properly reach me. And from there, I slowly started taking them out one by one. But then I suddenly noticed that someone was shooting at someone, and my first thought was, great, Faendal has finally caught up and decided to join the fight at the single worst possible moment. Because by that point I had already almost dealt with all the Forsworn myself. But then I noticed that a random encounter was happening nearby. A group of Stormcloaks was passing through, and they were also shooting at these enemies with the exact same steel arrows. So I'm not going to make anything up or pretend otherwise. Yes, there is a chance that Faendal may have fired one of those shots, but I didn't see him do it. What I definitely did see was a group of Stormcloaks, and more than one of them had steel arrows. So after going back and forth over it, I eventually decided to accept the situation and continue the run, especially since Faendal's role in our journey was almost over anyway. And to make sure there were no more confusing situations like that, I left him outside and entered the mine alone. Fighting the Forsworn inside was genuinely difficult too, but little by little I eventually managed to take them out. Then I started looking more closely at one of their swords, and I came to the conclusion that it was yellow. It really was yellow, or more specifically, the wrapping you can see around it was yellow. Then I somehow accidentally picked up a Forsworn axe as well, and that one turned out to be even more yellow than the sword. The only genuinely gray part was this stone right here. Overall, the axe had even more yellow on it. So basically, both the sword and the axe fit our rules. They also dealt significantly more damage than the dwarven dagger. And at this point in the run, any weapon upgrade was a huge advantage for us. So I kept both items and continued deeper into the mine. Once the mine was clear, I called Faendal inside. And now you're finally going to see exactly why I needed him. This mine contains a huge amount of gold ore, but I couldn't mine it myself because that required a pickaxe, and the pickaxe wasn't yellow, which meant we weren't allowed to use it. That's why I had come up with a plan all the way back in Riverwood. I would have a follower mine the ore for me. Fandel was the easiest follower I could bring along. We meet him almost immediately in Riverwood, and we don't have to pay him for his help. Janasa, for example, would have cost us 500 gold, and to get Lydia we would have needed to complete part of the main quest, and that means even more time, my friends. So Fandel seemed like the easiest and most logical option. I told him to pick up a pickaxe, and he picked it up. At that point everything looked like my plan was about to work perfectly, but then I asked him to mine the gold ore, and he simply told me that he couldn't do it.
Can't do that, sorry.
And at that exact moment, the entire plan completely fell apart. The whole plan I had been carrying around since Riverwood just collapsed right in front of me, and I was genuinely upset. I'm being completely honest with you, that one really disappointed me. If Fendal had been able to mine all that gold, we probably could have completed our financial objective without too much trouble. Of course, we still would have needed to sell the ore, find a few additional coins and all of that, but we definitely would have gotten a serious amount of gold out of this place, and now that wasn't gonna happen. Which meant I had to search even harder for every gold item and every single septum we could find from this point forward. But I still wasn't changing the original route because our next destination was Reachcliff Cave, where we needed to meet Iola and continue the quest. On the way, I quickly ran past a camp where the Forsworn were fighting a group of Imperial soldiers. I didn't get involved in any of that, I simply ran away from them and continued toward the cave. I met Iola near the entrance and asked her to wait outside, because fighting every single Draugr inside was never part of my plan. Yes, some of them carried a few gold coins, but those few coins simply weren't worth the time we would have spent on all those fights. So I left Iola by the entrance and decided to run through the entire cave by myself, and for the most part it worked. Of course there were a few problems along the way and I still had to deal with several Draugr, but the most important thing was defeating the final Draugr, so the main chamber would be empty, and I managed to do that too. The Draugr himself was kind of a pushover. He barely seemed interested in fighting me at all. I don't know, maybe just like you, he simply wanted to watch the video, or maybe he just hadn't fully woken up yet. Either way, it didn't really matter. I defeated him in the end, and fairly quickly too, I'd say. Although there were obviously a few failed attempts along the way. After that, I looted the final chamber and left the cave through the exit on the other side. But then we ran into another problem. The moment I left the cave, Iola went inside by herself, and by the time I ran all the way around and came back through the original entrance to catch up with her, she had already almost reached the final chamber. And that annoyed me a little. So I reloaded and started testing a few different options. Eventually, the best solution was to run from the final chamber all the way back to the beginning through the inside of the cave. Once again, I avoided all the Draugr, helped Iola near the entrance, quickly spoke to her, and after that, what happened to her wasn't really my concern anymore. But we still weren't going to get Brother Verulus just yet, because first there was one more very important item we needed to obtain. Some of you may have already guessed what it is, some of you probably haven't, but neither group needs to worry because I'm about to tell you where we're going anyway. We're going after Zephyr, the bow located very close to Reachcliff Cave inside Arkanthams. Once again, I had no intention of spending a long time exploring the whole place because our schedule was already extremely tight. We only needed the bow, so I ran inside, took some arrows from Katria, picked up a little gold and immediately headed towards Zephyr. Nothing particularly difficult happened along the way. I simply avoided all the Falmer and anything else that tried to stop me. Eventually, I reached the bow and successfully took it. After that, I was technically supposed to run all the way back along the same route, but then I realized there was absolutely no point in doing that when I could simply jump down. At first, of course, I had no idea whether our character would survive the fall, but as you can see, everything's good. we landed perfectly safely. And now, pay attention. Inside an unlocked chest at the bottom, I found the exact item we had previously been completely unable to obtain. A necklace of resist fire. The exact same fire resistance necklace we couldn't steal from Belethor. I just sat there thinking, wow, I was genuinely shocked. Can you imagine the chances of that exact necklace spawning inside this exact chest, and how badly we needed it right now? We had specifically been looking for fire protection for the fight against Krosis, so this was basically the perfect drop. After that, I immediately left Arkanthams feeling extremely satisfied. I equipped Zephyr, grabbed our dwarven arrows, and headed back toward Markarth. Once I got there, I convinced Brother Varulus to come with me to Reachcliff Cave. But before setting off, I decided to visit the inn one more time, check whether Klepper had anything new, get some sleep, recover our strength, and spend the point from our latest level up. On the way, I also found a Khajiit caravan. I sold them a few duplicate items that we didn't really need, and that brought our total up to 2,316 septims. So we had genuinely moved much closer to our financial objective. Unfortunately, we still had more expenses ahead of us, so having 2,300 coins didn't mean we had almost completed the challenge. A little farther down the road, I ran into a group of hired thugs who wanted to explain to our high elf that stealing is actually wrong, but I simply ignored them and kept running. Eventually, I brought Brother Varulus to the main chamber inside Reachcliff Cave. Iola did her part, and then we did ours. But at this point, you might say, wait, weren't we only supposed to eat something yellow? Basically, someone like us, someone yellow? And my answer is yes. But Brother Varulus was wearing robes with a pretty large yellow section. So I decided we could give ourselves a small discount on the rules here, which is exactly what I did. As a result, Namira gave us her golden ring, which immediately goes on to our list of yellow items. I also took Brother Varulus's robes and his staff of frostbite. We obviously couldn't use the staff because frost magic wasn't allowed under our rules, but now wearing a yellow outfit and carrying a yellow bow with yellow arrows, I immediately ran back toward Markarth. Except this time, I wasn't heading into the city itself. I was going straight to the carriage so we could begin the next part of our journey. But before that, one more quick progress check. We finished everything we needed to do in the Reach at 9 AM on the 20th. We left Whiterun at 7:30 PM on the 18th. As for the items, we now have 52 different ones, not counting the keys and notes that, unfortunately, I can't get rid of. And about the grey key to Nachuntzel that Calcelmo gave me, I only noticed it while editing, so sorry, I just missed it at the time. But that means our goal of finding 50 yellow items is officially complete. As you can see though, the amount of gold we have hasn't really changed, and that's exactly what I was talking about. And now we've arrived in Windhelm. Things here played out pretty much the same way as they had in the other cities. I first checked one inn, then the other, because Windhelm has two of them, if I remember correctly. After that, I searched the city, did a little more stealing, and finally got some rest so I could level up. Next, I ran out of the city and headed toward a location that was extremely important to us. There was a saber cat waiting for me inside, or rather, it was only waiting there until I showed up. I came here because from what I had managed to find out, this abandoned shack contains a wardrobe that never resets. In other words, any items we store inside shouldn't disappear over time. We needed this for one very simple reason. Our next destination was full of extremely heavy items that we still needed to take with us. So my task right now was to leave everything I wouldn't need anytime soon inside this wardrobe and free up as much inventory space as possible. Once that was done, I immediately ran to another extremely important place that was going to make a major difference in our future fight with Krosis. I'm talking about the Atronak Stone. It increases our magicka by 50 points and gives us a 50% chance to completely absorb an incoming spell. The downside is that our magicka regenerates 50% more slowly, but against Krosis, the ability to absorb his spells was far more important to us. Now, combined with our fire resistance necklace, a decent health pool, and a restoration skill that we had at least leveled up a little, we could realistically try to take him on. But as I mentioned before, we still needed a golden weapon. We already had a golden bow, but 14 dwarven arrows definitely wouldn't be enough to defeat Krosis. That's why we're returning to the Windhelm docks, and as you've probably already guessed, heading to Solstheim. Radaran guards use elven arrows regardless of our character's level, and right now, we needed to collect as many of those arrows as possible. Once I arrived on Solstheim, I naturally started searching through everything again. We had just spent money getting here, and we would also have to pay for the return trip to Skyrim, so once again, we needed to collect literally everything we could get our hands on. I robbed a few houses, picked a few pockets, and stole from guards and ordinary residents around Raven Rock. After that, I immediately headed to a location where, from what I had learned, there was a chance of finding a gold diamond ring. Unfortunately, when I arrived, I couldn't find any ring. It may have been inside a small locked strongbox, but as you might remember, we couldn't open it. On top of that, there was a burnt spriggan nearby, and it turned out to be extremely powerful. So with our original plan falling apart, I once again had to figure out where else I could scrape together enough septims to complete our financial goal. And that's when I came up with another plan. I decided to aggro the burnt spriggan and lead it back to a location we had passed shortly before. There was a shipwreck there with a group of bandits camped around it. I couldn't fight them myself because Solstheim is a fairly high-level island in general, so I decided to pit the bandits and the spriggan against each other. Naturally, it didn't work on the first try, but little by little I eventually managed to get them fighting each other. That allowed me to loot the ship and collect the gear from the defeated bandits, including their bone mold armor. I put it on and successfully made my way back toward Raven Rock to sell everything we no longer needed. But there was still one more thing. The burnt spriggan had survived the fight, and that gave me another idea. I didn't want to risk fighting it myself, so I decided to lead the spriggan all the way to Raven Rock while also aggroing an ash spawn along the way. The plan was to bring both of them into town and let the Radaran guards deal with them instead of me. What I hadn't accounted for was that the spriggan and the ash spawn were hostile to each other. They started fighting, so the ash spawn was the only one I managed to lead all the way to Raven Rock. Fortunately, several more ash spawn appeared just outside the town, and the Radaran guards started shooting at all of them. My own damage against the ash spawn was extremely low, but I still decided to jump in and help the guards. That way, we could gain some extra one-handed experience, raise our overall character level, and put more points into health. At this point, that was incredibly important to us. Naturally, this still didn't give me all the arrows I needed. On top of that, we had to carry the Radaran armor I had found near the burned down house, where the captain had been fighting the ash spawn back into town. I also went into the barracks and decided to steal another set of armor directly from the guards. We could sell the armor I had found and keep the stolen set for ourselves. That way, we could make a pretty decent amount of money. The only problem was that by the time I returned to Raven Rock, it was already too late and the merchants were closed. I didn't really want to just stay outside and wait, because that would only make our character suffer even more. He was already exhausted after the journey from Skyrim to Solstheim, but in the end I decided to do it anyway. We still had plenty of time, so I waited a few hours, sold everything we could, and with that we had officially completed our financial goal. After that, I went to get some rest, but I had forgotten one important thing. We were on Solstheim, and sleeping here wasn't nearly as safe as it was in Skyrim. As soon as our character fell asleep, he would immediately be transported to one of Mirak's stones. I reloaded several times, hoping I would be sent somewhere closer to Raven Rock, but eventually I just accepted it, saved the game, and made a run from the stone back to town. Near Raven Rock, by the way, we were greeted by one of Mirak's cultists, whom I successfully defeated. Looking more closely at his gear, I initially realized that only the gloves could unquestionably be called yellow. But in the end, I decided to take the cultist robes as well. I agree with anyone who says there isn't that much yellow on the robes, but it is objectively there. More importantly, I simply couldn't resist their enchantment. Cultist robes make magicka regenerate 75% faster. That was incredibly useful for our build, especially now that the Atronak stone was slowing magicka regeneration by 50%. So yes, I simply couldn't help myself. Sorry. You can judge me for it in the comments, but in my opinion, it was absolutely worth it. After that, I returned to Raven Rock and started growing the Redoran guards so they would shoot elven arrows at me. It was difficult, time-consuming, and required quite a few reloads. Their arrows could take our main character out in literally 2 hits, and that was while wearing armor. Without it, we died from a single shot. At least I managed to level up restoration quite a bit and gain a little heavy armor experience in the process. I also spent a point on the regeneration perk, which makes healing spells restore 50% more health. Before the fight with Krosis, that was exactly what we needed. I decided to hold on to 1 more perk point for now. Throughout the entire run, I tried not to spend perk points immediately after leveling up. As we progressed, we could level archery, restoration, or some other useful skill and then spend the point on a far more valuable perk. So I ran and jumped around under arrow fire for a little longer and eventually collected a fairly decent number of arrows. So I decided it was finally time to escape from Solstheim. But there was still one problem. I wanted to take 1 additional set of Redoran guard armor with pauldrons. That would allow us to count it as another yellow item for our list. Unfortunately, the armor was extremely heavy. You have no idea how much trouble I went through with all this inventory juggling, trying to leave with absolutely everything I had planned to take. I spent about half an hour on this. Obviously, you won't see the full extent of it in the video, but during that time, I made 2 fairly interesting discoveries. First, if you put items inside the barrels on the ship that travels between Solstheim and Skyrim, they won't be transported with you. Second, if your character is over-encumbered, the boat trip simply won't start. It took me far too long to figure this out. At first, I thought the guards could see me and that this was why the game wouldn't let me leave the island. But you have no idea how relieved I was when I realized that the entire problem was simply that I was over-encumbered. Right after that, however, I was a little disappointed because I still had to leave the additional armor set behind. I had already planned everything out, but now I had to abandon part of that plan. That was a shame. Still, we did make it back to Skyrim, and we did it as quickly as possible. I immediately ran back to our shack and took the most unquestionably yellow items out of the wardrobe. I specifically chose items that weighed very little but still helped us reach our target number of collected items. After that, we headed to the place that was the entire reason I had gone out of my way to obtain the Ring of Namira. Maybe you had already been wondering why I needed it, or perhaps you assumed I had completed that entire quest just to get 1 more yellow item. But my actual plan was a little more complicated. I wanted to reach the ritual stone near Whiterun. It was located roughly along our route from Windhelm to Sheer Point, where Krosis was waiting for us. A high elf can sometimes appear near the ritual stone. At least one had appeared there fairly often during my previous playthroughs. For some reason, I was almost certain I would see one again this time. But when I reached the stone, there wasn't a single high elf anywhere. I even loaded much earlier saves, ran back to the stone, and repeated the whole process again and again. But this time, the high elf simply never appeared. Does that mean we wasted all that time completing the quest for the Ring of Namira? Not really. The ring itself gave us 50 extra points of stamina for as long as we wore it. For a playthrough in which we had to spend almost all our time running, that was already a pretty nice bonus. But eventually, I found a much better solution. I noticed that a high elf worked at the Windhelm stables, so I came up with the following plan. Rest near the Khajiit caravan outside the city, warm up and wait for the high elf to come out of the building. Then I was going to kill him, feed on his body using the Ring of Namira, and immediately run to fight Krosis. For 5 minutes after feeding on a corpse, the ring increases our maximum health by another 50 points and makes it regenerate 50% faster. Combined with the constant 50 extra points of stamina, this was supposed to give us a serious advantage in the upcoming battle. At first, I decided to run straight through the mountains. Along the way, we ran into a wolf, which I quickly defeated before continuing to climb forward, but it gradually became clear that I had chosen a terrible route. We had already gotten extremely cold and wasted far too much time trying to make our way through the mountains. There was no point in continuing. I had simply stopped keeping proper track of the time and somehow convinced myself that we weren't going to make it. But in reality, we still had some time left. So I took a breath, stopped rushing, and decided to go around the mountains properly. In the end, we reached the right place in roughly the same amount of time we had wasted trying to take the direct route. But this time, at least we didn't freeze. And that was incredibly important. We had no reliable way to warm up quickly, and we would have to fight Krosis high in the mountains. On top of that, night was already approaching, so there was still the question of whether we could actually see this plan through to the end. But eventually, I reached Krosis, and the most critical moment of the entire run began. At first, everything was going surprisingly well. I wouldn't even say that the fight was causing me any serious problems. But then Krosis summoned a Frost Atronach, and the situation became much worse. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a nearby mountain that looked like we might be able to climb it, so I immediately ran toward it. Climbing it wasn't exactly easy, but it wasn't impossible either. While Krosis kept firing spells at us, I gradually climbed higher and higher until I finally reached the top. From that position, his fireballs simply couldn't reach us anymore. After that, all I had to do was keep shooting him with our bow. As you can see, little by little, I chipped away at his health until Krosis finally went down. That's it, we did it. We completed the challenge and it only took us 6 days. I realize I probably could have taken things a little more slowly. Maybe I could have even made the challenge a little harder, but that's something for the future. So yeah, I can officially say that we completed this challenge. It was pretty long, interesting, and sometimes difficult, especially when it came to planning the route and deciding which places we needed to visit. I was still mostly relying on what I knew in theory. I didn't run around and deliberately check every single thing beforehand. So this wasn't something I had completely planned and tested from start to finish. I just had a general plan before I began. I basically opened the Skyrim map and started drawing a route so the whole thing wouldn't turn into complete chaos. Because otherwise, we wouldn't have had time to do or find anything interesting. We would have just run around for a while and that would have been it. I think we did a lot of different and interesting things in those 6 days. I hope you enjoyed watching it too. Honestly, I thought the fight with Krosis was going to be a little more brutal and maybe more dynamic, but once I noticed that opportunity during the fight, I didn't see any reason to make things harder or drag it out on purpose. And honestly, I'm still really disappointed that the whole Feindal plan fell apart. I was really counting on him, and I genuinely had no idea it wasn't going to work. I'm sure a lot of you can tell me in the comments what I could have done differently and how you would have planned this route yourselves. I'd genuinely love to read your ideas. And please don't forget to support the channel in any way you can. I'd be incredibly grateful to every single one of you. See you, Traveler.